The night sky over Seoul looked normal to everyone on Earth. Stars twinkled in their usual places. The moon hung bright and full. Nobody saw the invisible ship floating 200 miles above the city. Commander Thexval stood on the bridge of his research vessel. His gray skin looked pale under the blue lights. His large black eyes focused on the screens showing the planet below. Earth looked so peaceful from up here, so primitive. "Commander, the scanning is complete," said Dr. Nixara. She was the head scientist on this mission. Her voice sounded excited through the ship's communication system. "These creatures show perfect brain patterns for our experiments." Thexval nodded slowly. The Velkari Empire had been searching for months to find the right species. They needed creatures that were smart enough to give useful data, but not smart enough to cause problems. These humans seemed perfect. "Show me the population centers," Thexval ordered. The main screen changed to show bright spots of light across the dark planet. Each spot represented millions of the creatures living together in what they called cities. The biggest concentration was on a large landmass that the humans called Asia. "The largest gathering is here," Dr. Nixara pointed at one bright spot. "The humans call this place Seoul. Over 9 million creatures live in this area alone." "Excellent," Thexval said. "We can take several specimens without anyone noticing. Begin target selection." Down on Earth, Kim Day walked out of the factory where he worked. It was almost midnight. The streets were quiet except for a few late-night delivery trucks. Day was tired after working 14 hours straight. All he wanted was to go home, eat some instant noodles, and sleep. Day was 28 years old and worked as a mechanical engineer. He fixed broken machines and designed new parts for manufacturing equipment. His job was not exciting, but it paid well enough for him to rent a small apartment and send money to his parents who lived in the countryside. He pulled his jacket tighter as cold winter air hit his face. December in Seoul was always freezing. His breath made small white clouds as he walked toward the subway station. The last train would leave in 20 minutes. High above him, invisible sensors were already studying every detail of his body and mind. "Target acquired," announced Research Assistant Velkoth from his position at the scanning station. "Adult male, approximately 28 Earth years old. Brain activity shows normal intelligence patterns. Physical condition is adequate for extended testing." Dr. Nixara studied the data flowing across her screen. Heart rate, brain waves, muscle density, bone structure. Everything looked perfect for their needs. This human would provide excellent research material. "What is his occupation?" she asked. "The creature appears to work with mechanical devices," Velkoth replied after checking the translation systems. "He repairs and creates tools for other creatures to use." "Even better," Dr. Nixara smiled. "A technical mind will give us more interesting results. Commander, I recommend we take this specimen." Thexval looked at the small figure walking alone on the dark street far below. The human looked so weak and helpless. Like all the other primitive species they had studied over the years, this would be just another routine collection mission. "Begin extraction," he ordered. The ship's abduction beam powered up silently. It was completely invisible and made no sound that human ears could detect. Advanced Velkari technology allowed them to reach through Earth's atmosphere and grab whatever they wanted without anyone knowing. Day was thinking about what to watch on television when he got home. Maybe there would be a good movie playing, or he could read more of that engineering manual he had been studying. He wanted to learn about the new welding techniques that were becoming popular in the industry. He never saw the pale blue light that suddenly surrounded him. One second Day was walking on the sidewalk in Seoul. The next second he was floating in empty space, surrounded by a bubble of energy that let him breathe normally. Below him, Earth looked like a small blue marble, covered in swirls of white clouds. Day's mind could not understand what was happening. This had to be a dream. Or maybe he had been hit by a car and was now unconscious in a hospital somewhere. Humans did not just float in space. That was impossible. The energy bubble moved upward very quickly. Earth became smaller and smaller until it looked like just another star in the darkness. Day tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to move his arms and legs, but the energy field held him perfectly still. Then he saw the ship. It was huge, at least a mile long and shaped like a giant metal triangle, Strange lights blinked along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at. The ship looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. It was clearly made by someone else. Something else. A large opening appeared in the bottom of the ship. The energy bubble carrying Day moved toward it. As they got closer, Day could see that the opening led to a bright white chamber inside the vessel. His engineering mind tried to understand what he was seeing. The technology was far beyond anything on Earth. The materials looked like metal but reflected light in ways that seemed impossible. The energy systems must be incredibly advanced to create the beam that had grabbed him. But mostly, Day felt terror. Pure simple fear that made his heart race and his hands shake. Whatever had taken him was not human, and they had brought him here for a reason. The energy bubble passed through the ship's hull and settled gently onto a flat surface inside the white chamber. The bubble disappeared, and Day fell to his knees on a floor that felt warm under his hands. He looked up and saw 3 creatures standing around him. They were about the same height as humans, but much thinner. Their skin was gray and looked very smooth like rubber. Their heads were much larger than human heads and completely bald. Most shocking of all were their eyes. Huge black pools that reflected no light at all. The creatures wore simple white clothing that covered their bodies but left their heads and hands exposed. They carried strange devices that looked like a cross between a tablet computer and a medical scanner. One of the creatures spoke in a language that sounded like clicking and whistling. Day could not understand a single word, but the tone seemed casual, like they were discussing the weather. Dr. Nixara looked down at their new specimen with satisfaction. The human had survived the extraction process without any damage. His vital signs showed extreme stress, which was normal for primitive creatures when they first encountered superior technology. Place the subject in examination room 7, she ordered. Begin the standard preparation procedures. I want to start basic testing within the hour. Research Assistant Velkoth activated a hovering platform that slid under Day's body. Invisible force fields lifted him gently off the floor and held him in place on the platform. Day tried to struggle but found he could not move at all. The force field was like being wrapped in invisible metal cables. He could breathe and blink. His eyes, but every other part of his body was completely frozen. The platform began moving through corridors that all looked exactly the same. White walls, white ceiling, white floors. Bright lights with no visible source. The only sounds were the soft humming of unknown machines and the quiet footsteps of his captors. As they traveled deeper into the ship, Day's fear began to mix with something else. Curiosity. His engineering background made him notice details that might be important later. The way the doors opened without any visible controls. The fact that gravity felt normal even though they were on a spaceship. The subtle vibrations in the floor that suggested massive engines running somewhere below. If he was going to survive this, he would need to understand how everything worked. The platform stopped in front of a door that slid open to reveal a small room with a metal table in the center. Straps and wires hung from the table's surface. Medical equipment lined the walls, though none of it looked like anything a human doctor would use. The force field released him, and Day collapsed onto the table. Before he could try to run, metal restraints snapped around his wrists and ankles. He was trapped. Dr. Nixara entered the room and began setting up her equipment. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. To her, Day was just another test subject. Another primitive creature to be studied, and eventually dissected. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake in Velkari history. 3 days had passed since Kim Day arrived on the Velkari ship. 3 days of tests, pain, and watching these gray creatures treat him like a laboratory animal. But Day was not breaking down like they expected. Instead, he was learning. Dr. Nixara stood over the examination table where Day lay strapped down. She held a device that looked like a metal wand with glowing crystals at the end. When she pressed it against his skin, electricity shot through his nervous system. The pain was terrible, but Day had stopped screaming after the first day. Increase the power level, she told Research Assistant Velkoth. I want to see how much stress this creature can handle before its mind breaks. Velkoth looked uncomfortable. Doctor, the readings show something unusual. Most species we have tested become passive after this level of treatment. But this human's brain activity is actually increasing. Dr. Nixara frowned and checked the monitors herself. The human's brain waves showed patterns she had never seen before. Instead of shutting down from trauma, the creature's mind seemed to be adapting, creating new pathways, learning from each test. Fascinating, she whispered. Run a complete neural scan. I want to understand what makes this species different. Day kept his eyes closed and tried to control his breathing. The aliens had attached a translation device to his head on the second day, so now he could understand their language. They did not know this yet because he had been careful to show no reaction when they spoke. Listening to them was teaching him important things. He learned that Dr. Nixara was the leader of the research team. Velkoth was younger and seemed to have doubts about their methods. There was also a security chief named Zarmoth who checked on the experiments twice each day. More importantly, Day was learning about the ship itself. During the tests, he kept his eyes open and studied everything around him. The medical equipment used power crystals that glowed brighter when they worked harder. The doors opened when someone approached them, which meant there were motion sensors. The gravity felt exactly like Earth, which meant they had artificial gravity generators. His engineering mind was building a map of their technology. Every detail might be useful later. Subject shows remarkable resistance to psychological pressure. Dr. Nixara dictated to the computer as she made her daily report. Pain tolerance is far above normal levels. Cognitive function remains high, despite extended stress testing. She paused and looked at Day's face. His eyes were closed, but she could tell he was awake. There was something about his stillness that seemed too controlled, too aware. Beginning phase 2. Testing tomorrow, she continued. We'll test physical limits and reaction speed. If the subject continues to show resistance, I recommend moving to direct neural interface. Day's heart rate spiked when he heard those words. Neural interface meant they wanted to stick something into his brain. That was a line he could not let them cross. After Dr. Nixara left, Velkoth remained to clean the equipment. He moved slowly and kept looking at Day with an expression that might have been guilt. Finally, he spoke. I know you can understand me, Velkoth said quietly. The translation device works both ways. You have been listening to us for days. Day opened his eyes and looked directly at the young alien. There was no point in pretending anymore. Why are you doing this to me? Day asked. His voice was rough from screaming during the early tests. Velkoth was quiet for a long moment. Because we can. Because your species is primitive, and we are advanced. Because the Velkari Empire takes what it wants from weaker creatures. What do you want from me? Dr. Nixara believes your species has unusual mental capabilities. She wants to understand how your brains work so we can improve our own intelligence. The research requires taking your brain apart piece by piece. Day felt cold fear run through his body. And you are okay with this? Velkoth looked away. I am a research assistant. I follow orders. That is how things work in the Empire. That is how things work everywhere until someone decides to fight back, Day said. Fight back? Velkoth made a sound that might have been laughter. You are one primitive creature locked in our most advanced research ship. Your entire planet does not even know we exist. What could you possibly do to fight back? Day smiled for the first time since his capture. It was not a happy smile. You would be surprised what humans can do when you back us into a corner. The next day brought new tests. Dr. Nixara wanted to study his reflexes and coordination. They unstrapped him from the table and put him in a larger room with moving obstacles and flashing lights. His job was to avoid getting hit while they monitored his reactions, but Day was not just avoiding obstacles. He was studying the room's layout. He memorized the position of every camera, every sensor, every piece of equipment. He noticed that the obstacles moved in predictable patterns controlled by a computer system near the door. When the test ended, he had bruises on his arms and legs, but he also had detailed knowledge of another part of their ship. Reaction time is exceptional, Dr. Nixara noted. Spatial awareness is far above average. This species shows promise for military applications as well as cognitive research. Security Chief Zarmoth entered the testing room as they were preparing to take Day back to his cell. Zarmoth was larger than the other Velkari, with darker gray skin and scars on his face that suggested he had seen combat. "Doctor, I have concerns about this specimen," Zarmoth said. "My security scans show unusual behavior patterns. The creature studies our equipment too carefully. It asks too many questions." "It is just curiosity," Dr. Nixara replied. "Primitive minds are naturally attracted to technology they cannot understand." "Perhaps, but I recommend increased security protocols, and I strongly advise against the neural interface procedure. If this creature is more intelligent than we assumed, direct brain contact could be dangerous." Dr. Nixara waved away his concerns. "Impossible. No primitive species has ever posed a threat to Velkari technology. The neural interface is scheduled for tomorrow morning." That night, alone in his cell, Day lay on the hard metal bench and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow they would try to connect directly to his brain. Once they did that, they would learn everything about human psychology, human technology, and human military capabilities. But they would also give him access to their computer systems. Day had spent 3 days learning about Velkari technology. He understood how their power systems worked, how their security systems functioned, and how their computer networks were organized. Most importantly, he had learned that they were overconfident. They saw him as a primitive animal. They did not expect him to understand their science or use their own systems against them. That overconfidence was going to be their biggest mistake. As he closed his eyes and tried to sleep, Day thought about Earth, about soul, about all the humans who had no idea that hostile aliens were studying them like laboratory rats. If he died tomorrow, no one would ever know what happened to him. But if he survived the neural interface, if he could turn their own arrogance against them, then maybe he could do more than just escape. Maybe he could make sure they never came back. The last thing Day heard before falling asleep was the soft humming of the ship's engines. Soon, he thought, that humming might become the sound of his weapon. Tomorrow would change everything. The neural interface chamber was the most advanced room on the entire Velkari ship. Dr. Nixara had spent years designing the equipment that would allow direct connection between alien minds and Velkari computers. Today she would use it on the human for the first time. Kim Day was strapped to a chair in the center of the room. Dozens of cables hung from the ceiling, each one ending in a sharp metal probe designed to pierce through skin and bone to reach the brain underneath. The procedure was always fatal for the test subjects, but the data they collected was usually worth the loss. "Begin preliminary scans," Dr. Nixara ordered as she checked the computer screens around the chamber. "I want complete mapping of the subject's neural pathways before we start extraction." Research assistant Velkoth worked at his control station, but his hands were shaking slightly. He had performed this procedure on dozens of other species, but something felt different about today. The human was too calm, too ready. "Doctor," Velkoth said hesitantly, "are you certain we should proceed?" Security Chief Zarmoth expressed serious concerns about this specimen. "Zarmoth worries too much," Dr. Nixara replied without looking up from her instruments. "This is just another primitive creature. Begin probe insertion sequence." The first probe moved toward Day's head, its sharp tip gleaming under the bright lights. But instead of fear or panic, Day began to speak. His voice was steady and clear through the translation device. "Before you do this, I want to tell you about my species." Dr. Nixara paused. Test subjects usually screamed or begged at this point. They did not try to have conversations. "Your words will not change anything," she said. "But if it helps you, accept your fate, you may speak." Day looked directly at her with eyes that showed no fear at all. "Humans have been on Earth for about 200,000 years. For most of that time, we were not the strongest or fastest creatures on our planet. We survived because we learned to adapt, to use tools, to work together when facing impossible odds." The probe continued moving closer to his skull. "We learned to hunt animals 50 times our size using nothing but sharp sticks and teamwork. When ice ages came, we survived by building fires and making clothes. When diseases killed millions of us, we found cures. When earthquakes destroyed our cities, we built them again. Velkoth found himself listening, despite his training. There was something hypnotic about the human's voice, something that demanded attention. Every time something tried to kill us, we got stronger, smarter, more dangerous. Do you know what we call creatures that hunt humans? Extinct. Dr. Nixara felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed the feeling away. Fascinating. Stories, but irrelevant. Your species never developed space travel or advanced weapons. You are primitives. Day smiled. It was the same cold smile he had shown Velkoth the day before. You think we are primitives because we have not left our planet yet. But do you know what we have been doing while we stayed on Earth? We have been learning to kill each other more efficiently than any species in the galaxy. The probe touched his skin. A tiny drop of blood appeared where the sharp tip made contact. We invented chemical weapons that can kill millions. Nuclear bombs that can destroy entire cities. We created diseases in laboratories just to see if we could. We have weapons that can hit targets on the other side of our planet with perfect accuracy. Dr. Nixara's finger hovered over the activation button. Something in the human's tone was making her nervous. But the most dangerous thing about humans is not our weapons. It is how we think. When you corner a human, when you threaten everything they care about, they do not give up. They adapt. They improvise. They find ways to turn your own strength against you. The probe began to push deeper into his skin. You made one mistake when you took me, Day continued, his voice never changing despite the pain. You assumed I was helpless because your technology is more advanced than ours. But technology is just tools. And humans are very good at figuring out how to use tools. Suddenly, every alarm in the chamber began screaming. Red lights flashed on all the control panels. The computer started showing error messages in the Velkari language. What is happening? Dr. Nixara shouted over the noise. Velkoth's fingers flew over his controls. System failure in the primary power grid. The neural interface is overloading. All our equipment is shutting down. The probe sparked and went dead inches from Day's brain. The restraints holding him to the chair lost power and clicked open. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie shadows throughout the chamber. In the confusion, nobody noticed that Day was no longer afraid. His eyes were bright with intelligence and purpose. While the Velkari ran around trying to fix their systems, he quietly slipped out of the restraint chair. How is this possible? Dr. Nixara demanded. Our systems are foolproof. No system is foolproof, Day said from behind her. Every system has weaknesses. You just have to know where to look. She spun around to find the human standing free in the middle of their most secure chamber. In his hand was a piece of metal he had torn from the restraint chair. Impossible. You were unconscious when we brought you here. You could not have sabotaged anything. I was not unconscious, I was learning. 3 days of tests taught me how your power systems work. The neural interface uses the same power crystals as your medical equipment. All I had to do was overload. One crystal and the feedback would cascade through your entire network. Velkoth stared at him in shock. But how could you overload a crystal without access to our controls? Day held up his left hand. The skin was burned and blackened where the probe had touched him. I used myself as a conductor. Human bioelectricity is different from what your systems expect. When the probe made contact with my nervous system, I channeled my brain's electrical activity directly into your power grid. My body became a virus in your computer network. Dr. Nixara reached for the emergency communicator on her belt, but Day was faster. The piece of metal in his hand flew across the room and struck the device, crushing it against the wall. You want to study human capabilities? Day asked as he picked up another piece of broken equipment. Let me give you a practical demonstration. The emergency lights flickered and died. In the darkness, Dr. Nixara heard the sound of metal striking flesh. Velkoth cried out in pain and collapsed to the floor. When the lights came back on 30 seconds later, both Velkari were unconscious, and Day was gone. Security Chief Zarmoth arrived at the neural interface chamber 10 minutes later with a full squad of armed guards. He found his chief scientist and her assistant tied up with cables from their own equipment, both suffering from concussions but alive. Where is the human? He demanded. Dr. Nixara looked up at him with fear in her large, black eyes. He is not human anymore. He has become something else, something that understands our technology better than we do. Zarmuth activated his communicator. All security teams to code red alert. We have a hostile prisoner loose on the ship. Consider the target extremely dangerous. As his voice echoed through the ship's communication system, Day was already 3 levels away, moving through maintenance tunnels that the Velkari had forgotten existed. In his hands were tools he had taken from the neural interface chamber. Tools that he was already modifying for purposes their designers had never imagined. Their Ida hunt had begun, but the Velkari were about to learn that they were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey. Security Chief Zarmuth had hunted dangerous creatures across 12 different star systems. He had captured rebel leaders, wild beasts, and escaped prisoners using advanced Velkari weapons and tactics. But he had never hunted anything like Kim. Day. Report! Zarmuth barked into his communicator as he marched through the ship's corridors with 20 armed guards. Motion sensors show the human moving through Service Tunnel 7, came the reply from the security center. He appears to be heading toward the engine room. Block all access points to that section, Zarmuth ordered. Use stun weapons only. The research team still needs him alive. What Zarmuth did not know was that Day had already learned how their communication system worked. Using tools taken from the neural interface chamber, he had built a simple device that could listen to their radio signals. Every order Zarmuth gave was being heard by his target. Day crouched in a maintenance shaft high above the main corridor and watched the Velkari security team run past him toward the engine room. They moved in perfect formation with military precision, but they were hunting in all the wrong places. While they searched for him in the lower levels, Day was heading in the opposite direction, toward the ship's computer center. During his 3 days of captivity, Day had noticed that all of the ship's systems were controlled from a central location. If he could reach that computer center and understand how it worked, he could turn the entire ship into his weapon. The maintenance shafts were narrow and dark, but they connected every part of the vessel. More importantly, they were not monitored by security cameras. The Velkari had never imagined that a prisoner would be smart enough or small enough to use them. Day moved through the shafts, like a ghost, using his engineering knowledge to read the symbols and diagrams on the walls. Slowly, he was building a complete map of the ship in his mind. Power systems, life support, artificial gravity, communications, every critical system and how to reach it. Behind him, he could hear the security teams getting more frustrated. Target is not in the engine room, someone reported over the radio. All access tunnels are clear. Impossible, Zarmuth replied. He cannot just disappear. Expand the search to all decks, check every room. Day smiled as he listened to their confusion. They were thinking like Velkari, using Velkari tactics to hunt what they assumed was a primitive creature. But Day was not thinking like prey anymore. He was thinking like a predator. The computer center was protected by a heavy door with multiple locks and security scanners. Under normal circumstances, it would have been impossible for a prisoner to enter. But these were not normal circumstances. Day had spent hours studying how Velkari doors worked. They used energy fields instead of mechanical locks, and those energy fields were controlled by the same type of power crystals he had already learned to manipulate. Using a modified probe from the neural interface equipment, he carefully overloaded the door's security system. The locks disengaged one by one until the heavy barrier slid open with a soft hiss. Inside the computer center, thousands of lights blinked on dozens of control panels. The room hummed with the power of machines that could control every function of the massive ship. To most people, it would have looked impossibly complex. Today, it looked like the biggest engineering puzzle he had ever seen. He approached the main console and studied the symbols and displays. The Velkari language was different from any human language, but the basic principles of computer systems were universal. Data flowed in patterns, commands followed logical sequences. Every function had controls and safeguards. Computer, display ship schematic, he said in the Velkari language he had learned from the translation device. The main screen lit up with a detailed diagram of the research vessel. Day studied it carefully, memorizing the location of every critical System. Then he began to understand just how much power he now had access to. Environmental controls, artificial gravity, internal communications, door locks, life support systems, emergency protocols, even the self-destruct sequence. Everything that kept the ship functioning was controlled from this room. Security alert, came a voice over the ship's communication system. The human has reached the computer center. All teams converge on Deck 5 immediately. Day looked up from the console and saw security teams running toward his location on the ship's internal monitors. He had maybe 5 minutes before they reached him. That would be enough. His fingers flew over the control panels as his engineering mind absorbed the logic of Velkari computer systems. Within 2 minutes, he had figured out how to access the ship's internal sensors. Within 3 minutes, he could control the artificial gravity in any section of the vessel. Within 4 minutes, he had learned to override the door lock systems. When Security Chief Zarmoth reached the computer center with his entire security force, they found the door sealed shut. No matter what they tried, the locks would not respond to their commands. Override the security system, Zarmoth ordered his technical specialist. I am trying, sir, but something is wrong. The computer is not accepting our authorization codes. Inside the computer center, Day watched them on the monitors and activated the ship's internal communication system. His voice echoed from speakers throughout the vessel. Attention crew of the Velkari research ship. This is Kim Day, the human you kidnapped for your experiments. I now control all of your primary systems. On the monitors, he could see Velkari throughout the ship stopping their work to stare at the speakers in shock. For 3 days you tortured me because you believed I was a primitive animal. You were wrong. I am a human being, and human beings do not forgive creatures that try to dissect our brains. Day's fingers moved across the control panels as he spoke. On Deck 3, the artificial gravity suddenly reversed, sending a group of researchers floating helplessly toward the ceiling. On Deck 7, all the doors began opening and closing randomly, trapping security teams in various compartments. You wanted to study human intelligence. Let me show you what human intelligence can accomplish when it is properly motivated. The lights throughout the ship began flickering in complex patterns. The computer system started displaying error messages in dozens of alien languages. The environmental controls began cycling between freezing cold and burning hot in different sections of the vessel. Security Chief Zarmoth pounded on the door to the computer center as chaos erupted around him. Human, he shouted. You cannot win this battle. We have superior numbers and weapons. Surrender now and we will not harm you. Day's laughter echoed from the speakers. Harm me? You already tried to harm me. You strapped me to a table and stuck needles in my brain. You treated me like a laboratory animal. Now you want to negotiate? The artificial gravity in the corridor where Zarmoth was standing suddenly increased to 3 times normal strength. The security chief and his guards collapsed to the floor, unable to stand under the crushing weight. I have a better idea, Day continued. I am going to show you what happens when you kidnap a human. I am going to teach you why my species conquered an entire planet using nothing but intelligence and determination. Through the ship's sensors, Day could see Velkari, crew members running in panic as their vessel turned against them. Systems they had trusted for years were now following the commands of their former prisoner. Their most advanced technology had become his weapon. You made one critical error in your research, Day said as he began implementing the final phase of his plan. You assumed that intelligence meant the ability to build advanced machines. But true intelligence is the ability to understand any machine and make it serve your purposes. The ship's engines began changing their rhythm. Instead of the steady hum the crew was used to, they now pulsed in an irregular pattern that made the entire vessel shake and vibrate. Welcome to school, Day announced. Class is now in session. Today's lesson is about human nature, and I promise you will never forget what you learn. Commander Thexaval stood on the bridge of his research ship and watched his crew fall apart. Half of his security teams were trapped in corridors by malfunctioning doors. The artificial gravity kept changing randomly, making it impossible to move normally through the vessel. Worst of all, the human was using their own communication system to broadcast a constant stream of threats and promises. "Status report," Thexval demanded as he struggled to maintain his balance. The gravity in the bridge had been fluctuating between 0 and double normal for the past 10 minutes. "All primary systems are compromised," reported Navigation Officer Catherine. "The human has somehow gained administrative access to our main computer network. He can control everything from life support to the weapons systems." "How is that possible? Our security protocols were designed by the finest minds in the Empire." "Apparently not fine enough," came Day's voice over the speakers. "Your security protocols assumed that only Velkari would try to access your systems. You never planned for someone who thinks differently." On the main screen, Day's face appeared. He was sitting in the computer center, surrounded by blinking control panels. His expression was calm and focused, like a man working on an interesting engineering problem. "Commander Thexval," Day continued, "I have been studying your ship's database for the past hour. Very educational reading. Did you know that your people have abducted over 3,000 intelligent beings in the last 5 years alone?" Thexval activated his personal communicator. "Human, you cannot hope to escape this vessel. Even if you control our systems, you are still trapped in deep space millions of miles from your homeworld." "Escape?" Day laughed. "Who said anything about escaping? I am not trying to get away from you anymore, Commander. Now I am trying to decide what to do with you." The temperature on the bridge suddenly dropped to near freezing. Frost began forming on the control panels as the crew shivered in their thin uniforms. "You see, I have been reading your files about those 3,000 abductions," Day continued, as the crew struggled with the cold. "Creatures taken from their homes and families, tortured for scientific research, dissected while they were still alive, all for the advancement of Velkari knowledge." The temperature returned to normal, but now the oxygen levels began dropping. The bridge crew started breathing heavily as the air grew thin. "I also found records of your military operations. Entire civilizations conquered because they had resources you wanted. Billions of beings enslaved or killed because they were not, as technologically advanced as the mighty Velkari Empire." Commander Thexval felt something he had never experienced before in his long career. Fear. Not just concern for his mission or worry about equipment failure, but pure terror at what this single human might do to him and his crew. "What do you want?" he asked. "That is a very good question," Day replied. "What should I want from the creatures who kidnapped me, tortured me, and planned to cut my brain apart for research?" The artificial gravity suddenly reversed on the bridge. Everyone except Thexval, who managed to grab his command chair, went floating toward the ceiling. They hung there helplessly while Day continued speaking. "I could kill all of you right now. Your own computer system would follow my orders. I could vent the atmosphere from every section of this ship and watch you suffocate in the vacuum of space. I could overload your power systems and turn your vessel into a very large bomb." Dr. Nixara's voice came over the communication system. She was calling from the medical bay where she had been treating injured crew members. "Please," she said. "We were just following our protocols. This is how scientific research has always been conducted in our civilization." "Your protocols," Day repeated. "Yes, I read about those too. Very thorough documentation. It seems that torturing intelligent beings is considered perfectly acceptable behavior in Velkari society." The gravity returned to normal and the bridge crew fell back to the floor. Several of them were injured from the impact, but they were all alive. "Here is what I find most interesting about your people," Day continued. "You consider yourselves to be highly advanced and civilized. You have faster-than-light travel, energy weapons, and technology that seems like magic to primitive species like humans. But you use all of that advancement to hurt creatures that cannot fight back." Commander Thexval slowly stood up and faced the main screen where Day's image was still visible. "What we do serves the greater good of galactic civilization," Thexval said. "The knowledge we gain from our research benefits everyone." "Does it?" Day asked. "Or does it just benefit the Velkari Empire? Because from where I sit, it looks like you use science as an excuse to be bullies." The main screen changed to show internal security footage from the past 3 days. Images of Day strapped to examination tables, while Dr. Nixara performed her painful tests. Video of him being shocked with electrical devices while research assistant Velkoth recorded the results. "This is what Velkari science looks like," Day said as the footage played. "Intelligent beings tortured for data, families destroyed so you can publish research papers, entire species wiped out so you can study their extinction." Thexval watched the footage and felt something that might have been shame. He had authorized hundreds of similar research projects during his career, but he had never been forced to see them from the perspective of the test subjects. "But here is the thing about bullies," Day continued. "They are only brave when they think their victims cannot fight back. What happens when the victim turns out to be stronger than expected? Suddenly, every weapon on the ship powered up simultaneously. Energy cannons, missile launchers, defensive systems, all of them armed and ready to fire. But instead of pointing outward toward potential enemies, they were all aimed inward at the ship itself. I now have control of every weapon system on this vessel," Day announced. "With a single command, I can turn your own guns on your own crew. Your advanced technology has become my tool for revenge." The bridge crew stared in horror at the weapons display showing dozens of armed systems ready to destroy them from the inside. "However," Day said after letting them absorb the full impact of their situation, "I am not going to kill you. Do you know why?" Commander Thexval could barely speak. "Why?" "Because I am not like you. When I have complete power over helpless victims, I do not torture them for science. When I have the ability to destroy entire civilizations, I do not use it just because I can. That is the difference between humans and Velkari. The weapon systems powered down. The environmental controls returned to normal settings. The artificial gravity stabilized at standard levels. I am going to make you an offer, Commander. 1. Chance to prove that your species is capable of learning from its mistakes." Thexval waited, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. "You are going to take me home to Earth. You are going to erase all records of human existence from your databases. And you are going to add Earth to your list of protected worlds that must never be approached by Velkari vessels. And if we refuse?" Day smiled, and it was the coldest expression Thexval had ever seen. "Then I will use your own technology to send a message to every species you have ever enslaved or conquered. I will tell them exactly where to find the Velkari homeworld. I will give them detailed plans of your military bases and weapon systems, and I will explain to them what your people did to their loved ones in the name of scientific research." The full implications of this threat hit Thexval like a physical blow. The Velkari Empire had made enemies across the galaxy during centuries of expansion and exploitation. If those enemies ever united against them with inside knowledge of Velkari weaknesses, you would start a galactic war, Thexval whispered. "No," Day corrected. "You already started the war when you began kidnapping and torturing innocent people. I am just offering to level the playing field." Commander Thexval looked around his bridge at his terrified crew. These were his people, and their lives depended on the decision he made in the next few seconds. "Very well," he said. "We accept your terms." The journey back to Earth took 3 days. 3 days of silence on the Velkari research ship as the crew tried to understand what had happened to them. They had captured what they thought was a primitive animal, and somehow that animal had turned their most advanced technology against them. Kim Day spent those 3 days in the computer center, not as a prisoner anymore, but as the ship's new commander. The Velkari crew followed his orders without question, because they had learned what happened when they tried to oppose him. During the journey, Day did more than just direct the ship toward home. He studied every piece of information in the Velkari database, star charts showing the locations of alien civilizations, technical manuals explaining how their weapons and ships worked. Most importantly, detailed records of every crime the Velkari Empire had committed against other species. Dr. Nixara came to visit him on the second day. She moved carefully like someone approaching a dangerous wild animal. "I want to understand," she said quietly. "How did you do this? How did one primitive creature defeat our entire ship?" Day looked up from the computer screen where he had been, studying Velkari military protocols. "You keep using that word, primitive. I do not think it means what you think it means. Your species has not developed faster than light travel. You have no energy weapons. Your technology is thousands of years behind ours. Technology is not intelligence, Day replied. Technology is just tools. And the most important tool any species can have is the ability to adapt and learn. Your people forgot how to do that. Dr. Nixara sat down across from him, though she kept her distance. What do you mean? You have had the same technology for centuries. The same weapons, the same ships, the same methods. You became comfortable, overconfident. You stopped expecting challenges because you had not faced any real opposition in generations. Day turned the computer screen so she could see it. The display showed technical specifications for Velkari power systems. Your energy crystals are incredibly advanced, but they all work on the same basic principles. Once I understood how one system functioned, I could predict how all your other systems would behave. Your technology is powerful, but it is not creative. And human technology is creative. Human technology is desperate, Day corrected. We build things because we need them to survive. Every human invention came from someone trying to solve a problem that could kill them if they failed. That makes our technology unpredictable. Dr. Nixara studied the technical displays, beginning to understand. You used our own expectations against us. Exactly. You expected me to be helpless, so you did not guard against the possibility that I might turn your tools into weapons. You expected me to be ignorant, so you did not hide your technology from me. You expected me to be weak, so you were not prepared. When I became strong. On the third day, Earth appeared on the main view screen. Blue oceans, white clouds, and brown continents, exactly as Day remembered it. Home looked so small and peaceful from space that it was hard to believe it could produce anything dangerous. Commander Thexval stood beside Day on the bridge, watching his homeworld grow larger as they approached. Your planet looks so quiet, Thexval said. It is difficult to believe that creatures like you evolved there. That is another mistake your people make, Day replied. You think that peaceful appearances mean weak inhabitants. Earth looks quiet because humans learn to cooperate with each other. But that cooperation is what makes us dangerous. How so? When you threaten one human, you threaten all humans. We share information. We work together. We remember injuries. And we plan revenge as a species, not just as individuals. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere and descended toward the Pacific Ocean. Day had chosen a landing spot far from any populated areas. He did not want his return to cause panic or alert human governments that aliens existed. As they prepared, the escape pod that would take him to the surface, Day made one final visit to the ship's computer center. He accessed the Velkari communication systems and began recording a message. What are you doing? Research Assistant Velkoth asked nervously. Insurance, Day replied. I am creating a data package that contains everything I learned about Velkari, technology, military capabilities, and the locations of your colonies. This message will be transmitted to Earth if anything happens to me. You said you would not reveal our existence to your people. I said I would not reveal it if you kept your word and left Earth alone. But if any Velkari ship ever comes near my planet again, this information will automatically be sent to every human government and military organization. Day finished the recording and encrypted it with safeguards that would trigger if he did not check in regularly. Then he turned to face the Velkari crew one last time. Dr. Nixara, you wanted to study human psychology. Let me give you one final lesson. The most dangerous thing about humans is not our technology or our weapons, it is our memory. Memory. We remember everything, every injury, every threat, every enemy, and we pass those memories to our children and grandchildren. If you had killed me on this ship, eventually some human would have figured out what happened, and when they did, your entire civilization would have paid the price. The escape pod was ready. Day climbed inside and looked back at the aliens who had changed his life forever. Commander Thexval, I suggest you take my story back to your leaders. Tell them about the human who turned their own ship against them. Explain why Earth should be marked as forbidden territory for all Velkari vessels. And if they do not listen? Day smiled one last time before sealing the pod. Then they will learn the same lesson you did, But next time it will not be just one human, it will be all of us. The pod launched and fell toward Earth's surface like a shooting star. Inside, Day watched the Velkari ship disappear into the darkness of space, carrying his captors back to their empire with a story that would change everything. 3 hours later, a fishing boat found Day floating in the Pacific Ocean. The fishermen pulled him aboard and listened to his confused story about being lost at sea for several days. They brought him to shore and called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors found evidence of unusual injuries that they could not explain, but Day told them he had hit his head and could not remember what happened. After 2 days of observation, they released him with a clean bill of health. Day returned to his job at the engineering company in Seoul. He went back to fixing machines and designing new parts for manufacturing equipment. To everyone around him, he seemed exactly the same as before. But sometimes, late at night, Day would look up at the stars and smile. He knew things about the universe that no other human had ever learned. He carried secrets that could change the course of history. Most importantly, he knew that Earth was no longer alone in the galaxy. And if other alien species ever decided to visit his planet with hostile intentions, they would find humans much better prepared than they expected. 6 months later, deep in space, the Velkari High Command received Commander Thexval's report about the failed research mission. The document was classified at the highest security level and shared only with the Empire's most senior leaders. After reading the report, the High Command issued new orders to all Velkari military and research vessels. The Sol system was declared off-limits permanently. No Velkari ship was permitted to approach within 50 light-years of Earth under any circumstances. The official reason given was resource depletion in the target area. The real reason was filed in a classified document that would never be seen by ordinary Velkari citizens. That document contained a single sentence that summarized everything the Empire had learned from their encounter with Kim Day. The species on the third planet of the Sol system has been classified as an extinction-level threat to Velkari civilization. Contact is forbidden. In the deepest archives of the Velkari Intelligence Service, another file was created. It contained detailed psychological profiles, technological assessments, and strategic recommendations about humanity. The file was labeled simply, Species 347b, The Monsters Who Smile. But the most important file was the one that Commander Thexval created for himself. It was not an official report or a strategic analysis. It was a personal journal entry that he wrote in his private quarters after returning from Earth. Today I learned the difference between being advanced and being dangerous, he wrote. The Velkari Empire is advanced. We have superior technology, faster ships and more powerful weapons than most species in the galaxy. But the humans are dangerous. They have something we lost long ago, the ability to turn any situation into an opportunity for survival. We thought we were studying them, but they were studying us. We thought we were in control, but they were learning to take control away from us. If this species ever develops interstellar travel, they will not be content to explore the galaxy. They will conquer it. And when they do, I hope they remember that at least one Velkari chose to let their representative go home safely. Thexval sealed the journal entry with his personal security codes and added one final note. If humanity ever contacts the Velkari Empire, show them this record. Tell them that we remember Kim Day. Tell them that we learned our lesson. And tell them that we hope they will judge our entire species based on the mercy one human showed to his captors. On Earth, Kim Day continued his quiet life as an engineer. But every night before going to sleep, he would check his computer for a special encrypted message that only he could access. The message would confirm that the Velkari ship was still traveling away from Earth, and that no other alien vessels had been detected in the solar system. As long as that message arrived each night, Earth would remain safe. And if it ever stopped coming, then humanity would finally learn that they were not alone in the universe. Either way, Day had made sure that his species would be ready for whatever came next.